More than 100 world leaders are set to sign the first major deal at the UN climate conference that's currently underway in Glasgow. They're promising to end deforestation by 2030. More than $19 billion in public and private funds have been pledged toward the plan, which is backed by countries representing over 85% of the world's forests. But climate campaigners say action is needed sooner. Activists are also worried the high-level talks will not deliver decisive action on emissions cuts. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced on Monday his country, one of the world's biggest polluters, would not achieve net zero emissions until 2070. The devastation that global warming is having on the planet can be seen everywhere, with the Arctic among the regions bearing the brunt. Scientists warn that it's heating up much faster than the rest of the world. They're urging global leaders gathering at COP26 to turn their words into tough action to save what's left of the Arctic.
What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. The longtime rallying cry of activists and scientists has become today's reality in places far from the far north, which experts warn is warming 3 times faster than the rest of the planet.
The freak weather we have in Europe is directly caused by what's happening in the Arctic, so this is serious for everybody.
Michael Mann is the European Union's special envoy for Arctic matters, taking forward the bloc's new Arctic strategy. He says it's bolder than previous plans, especially the call to end oil and gas drilling in the delicate region.
We have to act quickly, otherwise it's too late. We say we want coal, gas and oil to stay in the ground. We would be not faithful to our principles if we didn't say something as strong as that.
But saying strong things isn't enough to save the Arctic, says activist Larry Moffat.
But at the same time, we see that big oil companies like Shell and Total are drilling for oil there and hoping that the ice will melt, so it'll make it easier for them to drill. European banks are funding those projects. European insurance companies are insuring them.
Even if the EU could get its member countries to agree to end drilling, says sustainability professor Gail Whiteman, that falls far short of what's urgently needed.
Nobody's doing enough, so that's a really easy answer, not just the EU, but absolutely nobody. It's clear, no new drilling, and not just in the Arctic, but no new fossil fuel supply investment anywhere. Is what's going to protect the Arctic.
To help deliver blunt messages about the climate emergency, in her words, to speak science to power, Whiteman created the Arctic Base Camp protest site at the 2017 World Economic Forum in Davos. It's traveled to other global gatherings and now to Glasgow. Whiteman has enlisted some big names to help break down just how bad things are. Actor Rainn Wilson is one of them.
On the Greenland ice cap alone, 17 million of these bottles are melting every minute? No, every second. 17 million bottles a second. This is important. So what are we going to do about it?
That's the question leaders now face at COP26. Whiteman calls on them to have courage to do what may seem impossible.
We've seen that with the coronavirus situation, where people have done more than they ever thought possible. All hands on deck, and we rose to the challenge, and we did remarkable things. We have to do the same with climate change.
Whiteman warns that with no such thing as a vaccine against climate change, it's only prevention that can save the planet.
Let's bring in Sonia Seneviratne here. She's one of Switzerland's leading climate scientists, a professor at ETH Zurich, and she was the lead author of the IPCC's Special Report on Global Warming from 2018, as well as the panel's assessment report from this year. She joins me now from COP26 in Glasgow. Thanks for being with us. Professor Seneviratne, we just heard scientists there say that we need the same resolve in tackling climate change as we've shown in fighting the pandemic. Do you think that's a valid comparison?
Yes, definitely. I think that's a very valid comparison. In the case of the COVID situation, we had a COVID crisis, but in case of climate, definitely we also have a climate crisis, so we need to act very decisively.
What do you think is the most important step that the world leaders meeting in Glasgow need to agree on in order to actually do something about climate change?
Well, of course, first they have to set a goal, and I think in terms of this, it sounds like most world leaders are speaking of trying to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, which I think definitely is needed. But then I think the other point is, how do you get there? And I think that's one main issue. At the moment, you tend to have pledges very far in the future, maybe net zero 2050, but we have to realize that, for instance, to get to minus 50% of CO2 by 2030, we need to start reducing emissions now. So I think what is missing are pledges for the coming years, so that we really start decarbonization now.
I want to just show our viewers a graphic here about temperatures. It tracks the rising surface temperatures on Earth over the past 140 years, and you can easily see that from the 1970s onwards, temperatures rise faster and faster with no drop-offs expected in the foreseeable future. How big a difference will it make if the Earth's warming is limited to 2 degrees Celsius and not 1.5?
Well, it makes a substantial difference. So at 1.5 degrees, we avoid numerous additional risks. I think we need to be aware. At the moment, we have already gone past 1.1 degree, and I think we have seen the consequences of already been at about 1.1 degree. So we have seen the events that happened this summer. Several people died. People died, for instance, in Canada. There was a heat wave that reached 49.5 degrees. In Germany, people also died from heavy precipitation. And I think what you are seeing is we are really starting to have trouble to cope with the climate crisis. And this is only at 1.1 degrees. So you can imagine even 1.5 degrees is not going to be safe. It's going to be worse than now, but it avoids substantial additional impacts compared to 2 degrees.
At their opening speeches in Glasgow, we heard the heads of state there. They seem to recognize the seriousness of the situation. We've heard some very powerful words, but do you expect this to really translate into action?
Well, we'll see. I guess I cannot foresee what is going to happen, but I do hope so. I think compared to the last few years, we're in a different geopolitical situation. Of course, for many years, with Donald Trump as president of the United States, it was difficult to make any progress. So I do hope there will be progress at this meeting, but we'll see.
From your perspective as a scientist, what do you think is holding the world back when it comes to reaching the climate goals that we all understand need to be achieved if we're going to stop catastrophic climate change?
Well, I think obviously it's our dependence on fossil fuels. The problem is that we have built our society with fossil fuels. And of course, there are also very powerful lobbies behind the fossil fuels. I think that's the main issue. We know that there is an emergency. We knew already for several decades we need to act. I think the powerful effects of those lobbies was that, for instance, it also led to disinformation. I think now at least it is recognized that we have an emergency and we have to act very quickly. I think we also need to recognize we're in a different situation now than 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we didn't have very good alternatives for the transition. Now it's very different. Renewable energy is very cheap. So actually now we really have no excuse not to start this transition.
Sonia Senabaratne in Switzerland, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you.